You've probably seen me use this more than once. There's occasionally a job in the shop that I don't want to use my good striking knife. Well, Tajima, the guys that make our great marking tapes, make this small utility knife. It has a metal. You can buy replacement blades for it. Convenient, and for when you want a sacrificial blade, I think it's perfect. Grab one.
Hey.
Going? Yes, start, Rick?
Yep.
Hi folks, welcome to our Saturday night. We've got nothing else to do.
Is your mic on?
Yeah, I think so. Are you getting me?
No, I'm not getting you.
Sorry, it's not on. Here, David thought he was going to be part of this highly polished
There you go.
presentation. So we start again. Hi folks, welcome. Lots going on tonight, so I'll get right to it. We have a very special guest live from Devon, England. He's going to be on with us for the first half hour. I'm going to get to that in just a second. I'll give you a quick outline. Manoli is going to be in at 8:30 to play us a couple of, 7:30. He'll play a couple of original tunes, and that's on the guitar that is up for auction. The guitar was made by the East Tennessee Luthiers Guild and donated to us for auction as a means of raising money for the Purple Heart Project. Want to recognize who we have tonight? We have Frick running the show, so if anything goes wrong, it's his fault. Jake's on the camera. We have Rex that's going to be watching for any combat wounded vet who's been to our class. If you mention that, we will give you a shout out. Behind Rex is Mark Smith. Mark's been here working with us for the last couple months. This is his last night. He's got to go back to the real life of the military. He's sad.
Very sad.
But he'll come back again.
Oh, yes.
And we also have Joe Bright, who is going to introduce the Purple Heart Project on the hour. That would be 7 o'clock for you folks. And Joe was in our class probably 3 years ago. And we've maintained contact all these years. He's moved from one side of the country to the other. But he's going to come on and tell you from his perspective as a combat wounded vet, and I read his citation on what hand tool woodworking has done for him and the Purple Heart Project in particular. I do believe we have Super Dave Benson on. He'll be answering questions. Luther on yet?
Yep.
Colonel Luther Sheely out in Seattle is going to be on. He'll be answering or handling most of the questions of a general nature. We'll let the good ones come through. And I think that is, don't forget we have t-shirts, 3 of them, help us promote our cause. And we're always open to donations. We appreciate your help. I'll give you a quick update. We have had to move all of 2020 classes to 2021. So what we are doing, in a nutshell, we've had to expand our machine room because of some new equipment. We had to expand our shipping room because of growth. So our classroom has shrunk. We are taking over a building that we have right behind us that's 4,000 square feet. That's going to be our new classroom. It's going to have a designated kitchen, dining area, as well as a quiet room for those who need it. And the classroom itself will be somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 square feet. It's a nice, well-insulated building. It's fantastic, high ceilings, great lighting. So, for 2021, we are going to add an additional class to help make up a little bit for what we couldn't accommodate because of COVID situation. We will do a class in April. We are going to increase the class size to 14, 7 civilian spots and 7 combat wounded vet spots. So for 2021, we will be able to take on an additional 13 combat wounded vets. That's down from our normal 36, but everybody from this year is going to be put into 2021. And the civilian spots, if you need to change yours around, you'll be able to, and we will have some open spots for those hoping to get in. We'll give you more of that as time goes on. Now, let's get started. So back in 2002, I think, I went down, I was representing Lee Nelson in Canada, and I went down for an event at the facility down in Warren, Maine, and I met David Charlesworth. And I'd heard of David, And it was my first time learning about the infamous ruler trick, famous ruler trick. But I didn't take well to it because it was the antithesis to what I had been taught. And anybody who was taught traditional sharpening, you left the back of your blade flat, just like you did on a chisel. And it was an arduous process to go in and flatten, polish, and prepare the back of a plane blade and maintain it. That's the part that David's going to talk to you about in particular. So he showed me this thing, and I was intrigued enough to go home and play around. And after about a month of retraining my head, I came away thinking that is the smartest thing that I have ever learned about sharpening. Now, if you put sharpening into the equation of hand tool woodworking, you find out really quick that you don't do hand tool woodworking if you can't sharpen. So sharpening is the foundation for that process, that hobby, trade, whatever you want to call it. So if you were to have a better sharpening process, you see how fundamental it is to changing your entire approach to hand tool woodworking. So I'm going to introduce David, and I'm going to ask him to first give us the history of the Charlesworth ruler trick, and then we'll get right into answering your questions, and we'll do that all night. David's probably only going to be with us for about half an hour. We'll wait until he tires out. You got to remember it's 11 o'clock over there. And I want to mention this too. He has several DVDs. You can go to his site. Frick's going to put the link on there, as well as some books. If you would like to get one tonight, he will sign it for you. Just put a section. There should be a comment area available on the site, David. Yep, and he will. He'll graciously sign it for you.
Yes, John tells me there is.
There is. Is he on now? Is he on the split screen?
He is.
All right. David, go ahead and tell them the history of the ruler trick. I'm dying to hear it again.
Well, I will. My first student was obsessed by the Krenov books. I have to say he was a very, very good student. And of course, in one of those early books, he showed Japanese chisels. So when Japanese chisels became readily available in England, the natural next step was to try using the man-made Japanese waterstones. And I think in those days, our polishing stone might have been just a 6,000 grit. And we absolutely loved this. It was finer than anything that we had. But of course, when we started to prepare English, not very flat plane blades, we began to suffer from stiction in a major way. And we weren't bright enough to use detergent in our water. And it was giving us such trouble that I began to think, why are we polishing up? Hold on, I'm going to hold this up. Why are we polishing up all this area of metal that doesn't do any cutting? And I thought about the bevel side, where I have always used 3 bevels. I grind at 25. I hone on an 800 stone to get a very small wire edge, and I do that at, say, 33 degrees. And I then tip the blade up just by 2 degrees to polish the tip. So the polishing only happens at the tip. So the use of the ruler not only solved the stiction problem for us, but it also polished just the cutting edge. I don't know if you'll see this, it's a bit difficult, I expect. But the polished area on this blade is no more than 1 millimetre wide. And that's as much as it needs to be. And if you use fine polishing stones, it will never get wider than 1.5 mils in my experience. So that's the story of it, really. Except for one more thing. When we sharpened the Royal stones and Arkansas stones, we used to find that it was not totally consistent. We get a lovely sharp edge one sharpening, and then we wouldn't get it the next sharpening. What I like to say about the ruler trick is we always get a perfectly sharp edge. I don't get any fingers. So I think it's a very good thing.
Apply some dates to that, David. You didn't tell us.
I'm sorry. I moved into this workshop in 1976, and I think the first student would have been 79 or 80.
So
1979 or 80.
So ruler trick came about sometime early 1980?
Yep.
So when did it go public?
Well, I was asked to write for furniture and cabinet making. The lovely first editor, Paul Richardson, he asked me to write for the first issue. And of course, this caused much tearing of hair and stressing. And when I'd finally done it, he turned to me and he said, actually, what we really wanted was a series of 6 articles. And what I found was, when I'd done 6 articles, I got into the swing of it. And I would have put the ruler trick into Furniture and Cabinet Making magazine quite near the beginning. But I'm afraid I don't have that date in my head.
So I first found out about it, I think, was your first video 2002 with Lee Nielsen?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. That was the thing. I'd been very interested. I hated our UK Stanley and record planes so much that I actually imported one of Tom's number 5s as soon as it became available. And it was wonderful. And then I met him at an Axminster show, and he said, oh, you must come and visit. And I said, I can't come unless I can earn some money in the process. So we did 2 things. He arranged for me to take a class at the Mark Adams School, which was a bit hot, and we agreed to have a go at making a video. And it was fabulously amateurish. I don't know if you remember Wolfgang.
Oh yes, very well.
Lonely Wolfgang was Tom's assistant. And he did all the filming and all the editing. And, well, things have moved on, let's say that.
Yeah.
But we did it. I was very pleased to do it, nonetheless.
I was there. I was in the audience.
And you were.
Yeah.
Yes, if I remember rightly, you had a boot full of your lovely wood hinge boxes that you were taking home with you. Now, I tried to buy one from you, but you wouldn't take any money, so you gave it to me.
Oh, I changed my mind now.
And here it is. It's been looked after well, and I show it to all my students. I really like it. And inside, I thought I'd put one of my boxes. This was a commission that gave me a lot of pleasure. It's a semi-copy of a Japanese inroad box. And the thing about it that I was striving for was that pneumatic pop when it's opened. So that involved some very cunning jiggering around with a router and making some special accessories. So there we are.
I don't think I'd ever seen that. We've had.
It's in all the,
Pardon?
It's in one of the books.
I'll have to go back.
The only other thing, look, you asked me to bring my favourite plane along. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Good. Here we have a 1970s UK Stanley, nice heavy casting, and I've done everything known to man to tune it up. Because when I first had it as a student, it didn't work properly. And this is what got interest in plane tuning and sharpening going. And I've made a handle and I've made a knob.
There were quite a few questions related to that. Can you just give a quick overview of what you did to it?
Oh, yes. Took the frog out, checked the seating of the frog. This is something that very few people mention. The way that frog casting sits in the plane body, when you take it apart, you frequently find that it's absolutely appalling. So I do work on the little pads down there, as you do, I think. And then the surface of the frog. New blade, I've got a nice A2 Hawk blade in here. I've got new improved Lee-Nielsen chip breaker, the one that lots of people think doesn't work, it's complete rubbish. And the main thing, of course, is the sole flattening. The reason it didn't work for me when I began was the sole wasn't flat enough. And there were bumps behind the mouth and that sort of thing. Bumps behind the throat. Oh, I remember. You won't see this, I don't think. The throat on this plane, the mouth on this plane is 4 thousandths of an inch. And I did, in those days, file the front edge of the throat slightly forward, about 15 degrees. Now that isn't necessary, I've since discovered. And the extra file of the throat is not necessary. And I think we've learned that from the Japanese research on chip breakers. I think the ultra-close chip breaker setting can deal with the most difficult timbers. So that's the story.
All right. Hand me those questions, would you? It's probably easier. Is it easier for me to read them or you?
Well, he won't be able to hear me probably.
Okay. David, I'm going to go through and read. Now, if we're open to other questions coming in, so have you got any?
All right, now.
No? Okay. So I picked a few of these up. So, David, here's a question submitted by Bob Mack from Long Island, New York. Question is, what is a hand plane wear angle, period? Is it the same as the ruler trick?
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
I didn't either. That's why I assigned it to you.
I don't understand what this wear angle is.
I'm going to move on because I don't... The only angle that I would make reference to would be the angle of attack. And we know what that is on a standard bench plane. It's going to be 45 degrees. Okay, let me move on to another one.
Yeah.
Okay, this one is from Jimmy I can't pronounce his last name, but he's in West Homestead, Pennsylvania. I know you like the 5.5 as your go-to plane. Would you consider that the only plane to use with a shooting board, or can a shorter plane be used and dedicated to using it for only that purpose?
I have seen people using smaller planes, but they're generally doing very small work, like that complicated Japanese stuff where you get all the little bits coming together. So, I mean, if your work is tiny, you can use a smaller plane. But if your work is furniture-sized, weight is very important. And the 5.5 is much better than smaller planes, and it could be argued that the 7 and the 8 might be even better.
Nice to have one plane that you can do most everything with. So that's always been my approach. So you're not having to have a designated plane for the shooting board and another plane on the bench. It just gets crowded and cramped.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with that. I mean, the reality is that for some 30 or 40 years, well, let's say 30 years, I did all my work with the 5.5. It was the only plane I had that worked. The number 7 took about 30 years to flatten.
Yeah.
And the 4.5 is in the bin because the sole was so bad. I can't tell you how bad production was in this country.
Well, I don't know if it was any better as far as Stanley concerned. I don't think it was any better in any other country. I think it was just an accepted. I think hand planes had been relinquished to something that were only good for dealing with a squeaky door. I don't think anybody was using them for furniture.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take one out of from Rick Erickson in Colorado. What would you consider the game changer innovations that are must-haves in today's hand tool, power tool world for someone who's been out of woodworking for the last 7 or 8 years?
Well, I'm sorry, it's back to the 5.5. Spoiled for choice today. There's Wood River, there's Lee Nielsen, there's Clifton. Have I missed any? They've advanced so much with the thick blade and the flat soles. The only work needed on most of them is a little bit to the front of the chip breaker, as well as preparing and sharpening the blade, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. This is Lacey.
Wait, I got one.
Oh, sorry, there's one coming in live. What is it?
Okay.
David, can you hear Frick?
You might have to repeat it, that's all. So this one comes from Brendan. He
No.
says,
Okay, I'll repeat it.
does the ruler trick cause an issue on bevel up planes with a low bedding angle?
This is a good question, David. And the name, who's asking?
Brendan Falkowski.
Brendan Falkowski from,
Doesn't say.
doesn't say. He said, does the ruler trick cause any issues with a bevel up plane with its low bedding angle?
Absolutely not, because I get very cross. I've just seen somebody on YouTube talking about the ruler trick as a back bevel. Now, the ruler trick imposes a back bevel that is approximately 2/3 of 1 degree. In other words, it is totally negligible. And I've just shown you a blade where the polished area is 1 millimetre or 1.5 millimetres. That is not going to affect the seating of the blade on the frog, the internal frog of a bevel blade. No trouble at all.
Agree. Okay, this is Lacey Nagy from Victoria, Australia. Now, the name of the pine that she's referring to is Radiata, and I don't even want to guess at it. Is it suitable as a secondary wood for drawer sides and drawer dividers, or is it too soft to wear well? What's your preference for drawer sides for as far as wearing well and still being easy to work?
Well, the English tradition in the best work was 5/16 thick quartered oak. And this is where we tend to differ from the Americans, who tend to use, I believe, a 1/2-inch secondary timber, such as aspen or whatever. Now, I'm afraid I don't have the knowledge of the Australian woods to comment.
You use drawer slips a lot?
I do, all the time, yeah.
You want to just give them a quick brief on the advantage of a drawer slip?
Drawer slip gives a larger running surface, so hopefully it might extend the life a little bit. It looks ever so pretty inside. And you haven't compromised the thickness of your drawer side. So I think those are the only reasons I can think of.
Well,
I always have a little scratch bead down the edge, and that looks particularly pretty.
plus, a drawer slip gives you that extra wear surface without adding to the clumsiness or the excess weight of having a thick drawer side. Yeah.
Yes, well said.
Scott from Spokane, your opinion, why is it better to set planes... I love this question. Why is it better to set planes down on their blades versus setting them on their sides? Isn't a good plane edge compromised by setting the plane down on it every time?
Well, it shouldn't be if your bench top is reasonably clean. If your bench top is full of nails, then perhaps the side is good. But the main problem with setting a plane down on its side is that you may upset the lateral setting.
Agreed.
And there's no reason to do it. As far as I can understand, it was done in the schools in this country. People will walk past my bench at shows and they'll carefully pick up my plane and put it on its side. And if I see them, I get quite cross.
Never slapped them?
I put I've no resource to that. I put a little shim under the front. I tend to have a little shim which I feel for the blade with. And I put that on the bench, and then the front of the plane can go on that. And the blade doesn't even touch the bench. But I know lots of people, including you, I think, put it down on the bench. And as far as I know, it doesn't do any harm to the bench or the blade.
Yeah, I agree. This is from Frank DeSantis in Albuquerque, New Mexico. How do you get flat, square joints when in situations with cross grain, like where a door stile meets a rail?
Right. Well, I mark out that tenon, which is on the rail. I mark the shoulders with a knife. I go around very carefully, observing the rule that you must always keep the stock against the face side or the face edge, and you can mark a perfectly square line all the way around. I don't have the sawing skills that Rob has, so I cheat. I saw fairly close, and then I put it up in the vise, and I use a razor-sharp chisel to finish those shoulders. And they come exactly where I put that knife. And providing the preparation of the wood has been good, it will be perfectly square.
I think what he's referring to is how do you finish plane the top surface where the stile meets the rail?
Well, on the edge, Rob, or the surface?
On the surface.
Well, all you have to do is you're planing along one surface, and when you approach that joint, you skew the plane over at 45 degrees. And you skew it so that both pieces of timber, the rail and the stile, feel that they are being planed at 45 degrees in the best direction. And you can leave an immaculate finish if you do this with a fine shaving. That's it.
I sometimes purposely use my big number 8 when I do that, so I have that extra 3/8 of an inch, not 3/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch in width on the blade, going from a 2 3/8.
That's a good idea.
Going 2 3/8 to 2 5/8.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay, we shall go to.
This is a
another one coming live.
Simple question coming from
Go ahead.
It's a username, Briars SDB. Should you use the ruler trick on a chisel?
That's a good question, David. For those who don't know, explain why ruler tricks are not used on chisels.
Well, I happen to have a chisel here. When you make a cut with a chisel, the edge is guided by the whole of the back of the chisel. If you don't have that flat and good, you won't be able to make a straight cut. If you have any belly, your chisel will cut up like that. So this guiding surface needs to be flat. And I'm always saying, don't, for heaven's sake, use the ruler trick on chisels. It's not suitable.
We did cover planes. Is there anything else any other tool that you use the ruler trick?
Almost every cutting edge I've got except chisels. I use it for hand scrapers. I use it for scraper plane blades. I use it for spoke shaves. Almost everything.
I do.
Because it's clearly gets such a good result.
I do too. I've got a good question here from David in Albany Creek, Australia. A lot of Aussies on tonight. How do I stop my plane from shuttering, leaving little ridges on the first inch or so of the board? I use Stanley planes with original blades.
Well, I suspect that he's using a number 4. And one of the reasons I particularly dislike number 4s is that the front of the sole, the head of the blade, is so short. So you're not getting a good registration as you are with something like the 5.5 or the 6. I'm afraid I can't say more than that, because if it did happen to me so long ago, and I can't remember. I suspect sharpening as well. I suspect sharpening. I suspect too much pressure on the backhand. I suspect too big a shaving. Any of those things can cause problems.
We're just saying goodbye. Mark Smith, who's our combat wounded vet / shop assistant, is he has to go home. He's been with us for the last 2 months. He's got to go back to his real job, so we're offering Mark a salute, but he hopefully will be back at some point.
Definitely will be back. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark.
I appreciate it. Take care. Have a great night.
Nice meeting you.
David, I would add to that, he said he's using Stanley planes with the original blades. So you're also dealing with a very thin blade. You're dealing probably with, as you mentioned, very poor contact surfaces between the frog and the sole, the blade and the face of the frog. So there may also be some chatter in there just because of shortcomings in the tool. Would you not agree?
Yes, I would, absolutely.
So let's offer him a solution. If you get those stutter marks and you continue to work in that same direction, I find all that happens is the stutter marks just get deeper and longer. My approach has always been to attack it from an opposite direction. It may even mean changing your body to skew in the other direction so that you can come underneath those, because if you just continue on the path you're on, they're not going to go away, at least not easily. What do you think?
Yeah, skewing's a great idea. But a new plane's a better idea.
Yeah, I agree too. As soon as I read the last part of the question, it almost was the answer to the question. Okay, that was David. Now we'll go to Sal Mrozinski in East Point, Michigan. I'm new to woodworking and I would like to purchase a jack plane. Which plane should I purchase, a standard jack plane or a low-angle jack plane, and why? What's the difference?
Well, Rob covers this frequently. Don't touch the low-angle jack with a barge pole. And the reason is that you can't make adjustments as you're working. It's not convenient. It's very cumbersome. It's funny, I've got two lovely ones. I've got a Linus and a Veritas, and I never use them. They fit in the cupboard.
Sold mine.
Ah,
Find them too
good
light.
idea.
Too light. They don't have the amount of. They don't have enough surface area on the edge to be used on a shooting board. I don't like the position of the handles. I'm not a fan at all. Can you comment on this? I've often used as my response to that question that when that plane was originally introduced to a professional market, that it didn't take. They weren't made for very many years, and there's very few of them around. Yet this traditional beveled down bench plane were made by the millions, and there's a lot of them left. So that seemed to be the preference of professional craftsmen of the day.
Yeah, I'd go with that.
All right, that was easy. Also the weight.
Yeah.
Big difference in the weight.
Yes.
Okay, this is coming from...
I got one.
Oh, sorry, we got one coming in live.
So this one says, ask David if he thinks moving the chip breaker forward is a good strategy to help prevent tear out.
All right, David, since we differ on this, I'm going to let you answer it. What's his name?
Luther sent it to me, so...
Oh, didn't get the name. He wants to know your feelings on moving the chip breaker forward and why you think it works to reduce tear out.
Well, I'll start with, I only learned this about 5 or 6 years ago. It was when the two Japanese professors, Kawai and Kato, who you can look up on the internet, they did some wonderful research on chip breaker position and chip breaker angle. And they were suggesting that a chip breaker setting of as little as 4/1000ths of an inch or possibly 8/1000ths of an inch away from the edge would eliminate tear out in the most difficult grain. Now, this was completely new to me because all the old textbooks, they all used to say, oh, for heavy work, move it back a 16th of an inch. For fine work and with difficult timber, move it closer or move it close. But nobody ever put a figure on how close it needed to be. Now, after this Japanese research came up and was being discussed on various forums, one or two people stuck their hands in the air and said, oh, we always knew that. And I know that in the whole of my career, 40, whatever it is, years, nobody had ever suggested to me a chip breaker setting of 4 or 8/1000ths of an inch. So I went home and I tried it, and I can assure you that it does work if your chip breaker is properly prepared. So it's fascinating. I know Rob doesn't like it.
All right, well, we'll leave it at that. Okay, any more in the live end, Rick?
What's the advantage? What's the advantage, if any, to a purpose-made scrub plane compared to a converted bench plane? That comes from Mark Bynan.
Mark, what's his last name?
Bynan?
Bynan wants to know if there is any advantage to using a dedicated, purpose-made scrub plane versus just putting a heavily cambered blade on a smoother.
I'm afraid I can't comment here because my workshop has machinery. So I have very, very little, if ever, use for a scrub plane.
I'll add this. A dedicated scrub plane has a larger rear tote, so you can get a full 4-finger grip on it. It has a much thicker blade. It has a very wide open throat. It's relatively fast adjustment, and it's a narrow body. Allows you to go in and work an area very specific, so it's not affected by the surrounding surface. If I was going to do a lot of stock preparation by hand, I would have a designated scrub plane. And I will add this too. I like it to be light because you use it almost like an axe as opposed to a bench plane where you want the extra weight. You have a tendency to throw a scrub plane around quite aggressively as you're trying to get rid of the rough exterior. All right, I'm going to go back to this one.
I got a good one.
Okay, let me throw in one here and then we'll come back to you.
Okay.
Matt Cooper from Sheffield, England would like to know, what is the best timber for making a cigar humidor, solid or veneer?
Oh, I'm afraid I'm not very well up on this. I believe that the good ones are lined with some kind of cedar, some kind of Central American cedar, which we don't see in this country. But I'm very, very ignorant, so I'll shut up.
Okay, what do you have, Frank?
Okay, so this comes from Michael Curry.
Michael
He's in
Curry's asking,
Delavan, Wisconsin. He noticed that David usually uses a traditional wooden marking gauge and Rob uses a wheel metal marking gauge. So he's asking both of you, what are the advantages?
the question, David, is marking gauges. You use a traditional wooden marking gauge and I use the wheel marking gauge. Reason why you stick with the traditional?
The only reason I stick with the traditional is price, because I always wanted my students to have at least 4 gauges, possibly 5. And we'd have 3. Now, I'm not using them as they come from the factory. We work on those gauges. We change the position of the pin, and we change the nature of the pin. And I end up with what I refer to as a micro crescent-shaped blade in the pin. And this cuts, so it works perfectly across grain, and it also works perfectly long grain. So I use them, but we do a lot of work on them. And I do like the Cosman type gauge. I have several examples here, some of which I don't like, some of which I do. Up till the existence of rods, I was quite clear that type mark were the best. I haven't had one of Rob, so I can't comment, but I'm sure it's very good.
Thank you. I agree.
And I like what's even more interesting is that you're coming out with different cutting disc sizes for different jobs, and I think that's very interesting.
I was intrigued that you promote having several gauges. I do as well. I think it's an underutilized tool for the most part, and it has numerous uses. I agree with David on why the disadvantage of the traditional wooden gauge is that it comes with a pin that is of no use until it's worked on. Nobody tells you that. At least the manufacturer doesn't tell you that. And for the average person just getting started who's not in a class, how is he going to take a needle file to that and actually come up with something? So the big advantage of the wheel gauges is you take the cutter off, you lay it face down on a stone, you use your finger to face hone it, and in a matter of a few minutes you've got a sharp gauge. So I would say the advantage of the wheel gauge is the amount of time it takes to get it ready for use. But I always had a traditional wooden gauge that I had to go in and adjust the pin and turn it into a knife instead of a pin, and I could never figure why they would sell that thing. If you took a traditional wooden gauge as it comes and drag it across the board, you'd have this terrible scratch that would be useless. Good.
I actually rang up Peter Marples, who's one of the major manufacturers, and I tried to sell him the idea that I'd got some improvements, but he wasn't interested because he sells X thousand every year without having to try.
Yeah, I can only imagine what those poor newbies are doing, trying to scrape that thing across the end of a board. My goodness.
It's hopeless.
We're going to go on to a question from Roger in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. What is an acceptable plane shaving thickness for a non-Cosman average guy?
Well, with my students here, when they were making their bench, I'd suggest that 2 thou was a quite good, nice shaving, not too hard to push and not too slow to remove some material.
And
So I like 2 thou.
in reference,
4 thou begins to get rather difficult to push.
just give them something to reference to what is 2 thou?
Oh, I'm sorry. 2 thou is half the thickness of a piece of good quality computer printer paper. The paper is 4 thou, and that's a heavy shaving in my book, in hardwood, and 2 thou would be half of that. Newspaper thickness. Newspaper is 2 thou.
Is it really? I know you always used to
Yeah.
use cigarette papers as shims. Were they not 2 thou?
Yeah. Sorry?
No, I said cigarette papers are 2 thou, are they not?
No, you can get fine ones that are 1 thou.
Really?
A blue Ritzler, which we have in this country, is 1 thou. Blue Ritzler 1 thou, newspaper 2 thou, printer paper 4 thou.
Good
And then the
reference.
next interesting thing is very thin card, a business card is quite interesting. But I was very lucky. A very kind man in America sent me a booklet of engineering shims, plastic engineering shims. I tend to have been using those of recent years.
I just got
But I
some.
find very useful.
I just got some myself just recently as well.
Excellent.
All right. Well, we've kept you on here for 50 minutes.
Well, I must say I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Before we let you go, I want to. Would you hold up your latest book? Tell us a little bit about. Is that the one that they can purchase?
This is the one that's in print. It's available. It's very reasonable cost. It's about £15. Now, unfortunately, my publishers have destroyed the material for the other 2 books, which are very favourite, particularly this one, because I put a lot of student work into it. But you can still get these, you can get them second-hand from us, if you're lucky, and if you're not, you can, of course, get them on Amazon and other second-hand booksellers.
So,
But they tend to be about £40-50 each now, because they're out of print.
any chance that they'll be printed again?
No, the publishers won't let me have the rights. They won't let me have the publishing rights. And I consulted a very expensive solicitor who worked in this field, and she told me that I didn't have a cast iron case, which I can't understand. Because Chris Schwartz would love to reproduce them. But there we go. They're still available second hand.
Okay, and they can be purchased tonight off of David's site. The link is included. If you'd like, he'll sign it for you. David, hold up what DVDs are available, would you please?
Oh, I can't, Rob. There are 11.
Right.
But these are some of the most... Those are possibly the most useful to do with sharpening and planing. Can they see that?
Put it up a little bit higher. Can't see the title at the bottom.
Sorry.
Plane sharpening, precision planing.
Yeah.
And what's your most recent?
The most recent was the through dovetail. But you wouldn't approve of my methods at all.
Yeah. Hey, we can agree to
Mine
disagree.
Mine's dovetailing for people who can't saw.
Who need my saw.
Probably do.
Well, David, it's been wonderful to have you on here. It's good to see you. Haven't seen you in a while. Any closing comments? So how many people do we have on tonight?
Right now we have 550.
We have 550 folks on watching. Anything you'd like to say?
Well, just as I've really enjoyed it very much. And thank you.
You're welcome. We'll plan to do it again.
Dogs are going berserk.
All right, it's bedtime.
Tell me, how many people?
550.
60.
All right.
560. We'll go for a bigger audience and we'll do it again.
Yeah.
All right, David. You have a good night. Thank you, and we'll talk soon.
Will do.
See you.
Thank you.
That was great. We'll keep going. I just want to take a quick break and tell you that if you are interested in helping with our Purple Heart project, you can do so. You can go to our website. The link will be on there, and you can donate. All of the funds go to supporting a combat wounded vet who we will bring to our class. We do this. The plan is for next year, 7 classes, 7 combat wounded vets in each class. It's a 6-day class. We cover their airfare, their hotel, their meals. We send each vet home with somewhere around $3,400 to $3,600 worth of tools, and they will all get a bench. Jack Lane down in Texas is in charge of the bench brigade. This is an effort whereby we solicit help from civilians who agree to procure the materials. We provide them with the plans. They build the bench as to our specifications. We provide them with the vise and the bench dogs. And then once finished, they deliver it to a vet, combat wounded vet who has been in our class or will be in our class that is close to them. Now, if you go on to, can we put a link to that Facebook page?
Which one? Sorry.
The bench brigade.
Yep.
We try to get a video of the actual delivery, and I just watched one which was great. It was Jack himself delivering it to Jake. Jeremy Brees. They're both in Texas. And he took the bench and delivered it to Jeremy and had a little chat with him, and it was great. So if you get a chance, go over there and take a look. Don't forget, while I'm talking about that, I don't know if that's how they're tied together. By the way, we've halted accepting any more volunteers because we have more volunteers than we have vets right now. But stay tuned. We'll ramp this up again once COVID lets us resume our program. If you haven't registered for our newsletter, the Colonel puts a ton of work into it, and this is how we notify people. We're going to try to continue this theme of bringing on a guest woodworker each time we do this. I think we're going to go back to twice a month, every other weekend. And I can't announce the names because we haven't secured them yet, but they will all be names that you'll recognize. And if you're on the newsletter, you'll get first crack at it. You'll know how and when. And what else I want to tell you? Oh, and so, well, I'm pointing over here. T-shirts. That's what I was trying to think of. All right. Any recent questions, or shall I go? We had way more questions than we can handle, but we try to take a couple from the live. Yes, no? All right, I'm going to go. So Tom Bird in Baraboo, I think they make that up, Wisconsin, said, if you could only use one table saw blade, what would it be? Probably, it would definitely be a Freud. I think the Freud thin kerf, they're painted with that red coating. I have a lot of plain blades, and I've got just about every brand you can think of. Pardon? Plain blades? Saw blades. And the relatively inexpensive red colored 10-inch Freud thin kerf, so they're, instead of an eighth of an inch, they're 3/32, in my opinion, are the best blades for the money. In fact, I think they're the best blades. If there was something better, I'd use it. And if I was going to only have one, it would probably be a combination blade that is designed to both rip and cross-cut. All right. Rich Val in Oviedo, Florida says, I joined it in plain poplar for a bookshelf built in a desk to have the boards cup and bow before beginning to assemble. As I live in Florida, it is hot and humid, so how do I prevent curling, bowing, or even twisting of the boards? Yeah, that's a good question. So when I buy lumber, and I got lots of it here, I never buy it, and I try to never buy it and use it within the same few days. You got to remember, and if you don't know this, maybe it's coming as a surprise to you, but your piece of wood is like a sponge. And if you put that sponge into water, it's going to absorb the water, and the sponge is going to get a lot bigger than it was. Take the sponge out of the water and set it there, and it's going to start to dehydrate, and it'll eventually be a very small sponge dried up. So that piece of wood is always wanting to reach equilibrium with the surrounding atmosphere. So if you're in a very humid area and you bring a dry piece of wood into that area, it is going to start absorbing the wood until it gets a balance. The easiest way to do that, if it's a small enough piece, I could take this piece of wood and I could weigh it on a very accurate scale. And I could weigh it every day, and if the area, the shop was not humidity controlled, that piece of wood would gain or lose weight depending on what the atmosphere was. If there was a low pressure system coming in, a lot of humidity in the air, that piece would start to get heavier. And if a high pressure system came in and became very dry, that piece would get lighter. So you can't prevent that. So you buy your wood, it's gone from being in a tree to being cut to being dried to being stored somewhere, and if it's in a store long enough, it's going to reach equilibrium with the store. Well, that store may not be the same as your shop, and your shop may not be the same as where it's going to end up being. The only thing you can control is up to where it's going to end up. So I bring it into my shop, I keep the humidity controlled in here, and I will let that acclimate before I start to use it. Now, when I go and buy lumber, and if you buy lumber from most places, you have to buy off the top of the pile. Now that stack of lumber, if it's selecting better, it's going to be the very best. But even the very best means there's going to be the upper end of the grade and the lower end of the grade. So if that grade says it has to have 60% clear face, well, that means you might find a piece that is 100% clear, and you might find a piece that's only 60% clear. So you've got to take whatever comes off the top of the pile. You bring that home. You bought the extra because you're always going to find that you're going to have a check you didn't see at first, or there's going to be something that's going to cause you to need about 30 to 40% more wood than your plan actually called for. If in the process of going through my lumber I find one that's really badly twisted, not so much cupped. Cupped is when the board, if the board is shaped like this, it's cupped. If it's twisted like that, then it's got wind or twist in it. If it's bowed, then it's going to be up like that lengthwise. If it's badly bowed, it's probably going to continue to be like that. You can machine it and straighten it out, but it probably is going to continue to misbehave. That board would end up getting cut into short pieces. If it's got a bad twist in it, I don't want to use that anywhere, because no matter what you do, there's always going to be, that's a signal that there's some internal stress going on, and as you machine it, it's just going to continue to make evident that internal stress. So I try to work with boards that are as stable as possible in the rough. Chances are they'll be as stable as possible in the finished state. So control your humidity in the area that you're going to be. Let your wood acclimate to that area before you start to use it, and stay away from bad defects, thinking that you can fix it by just machining it flat. If it's really bad in the rough state, it's probably going to be equally bad in the finished state. That's a long answer, but it needed it.
Did Eric Jalmerson wants to know if that's the brass hammer he made you, the one with the bullet
Eric,
case.
I'm afraid, I hope those firing pins aren't active. Yes, Eric up in Newfoundland made that for me. And that is heavy. He's obviously watching.
Yeah.
I haven't whacked anybody with it yet.
I have a good question too here.
Go ahead.
Okay, so hi Rob, why do you prefer square dog holes? And that's from Arthur in South Africa.
Why do I prefer square dog holes? Well, if I'm planing something like that, the square dog hole is not going to rotate on me if I'm not squeezing it between two. Why else do I prefer a square dog hole? There's probably a bit of tradition in there. I can make my, you know what? I'm trying to give you a really good reason, and I probably don't have a really good reason, because we use round dogs on our other benches, and they seem to be just fine. I suppose the only thing would be, number one, traditionally they were square, and they don't rotate on you when you're trying to work against them. But if you're pushing straight on, it shouldn't make much of a difference anyway. So I'm going to stick with tradition being the biggest reason why. Rich Val in Oviedo, Florida. Oh, sorry, I just read that one. Fred Herman in Victoria. I never see you use a pull saw. Personal preference or technical reason? Great question. I actually have one somewhere, I just don't know where it is. But pull saws are typically Eastern or Japanese saws. And if you're dealing in really, really thin, I shouldn't say thin, but very, very soft wood. Here's a classic example. This is a piece of northeastern cedar, northern white cedar. It's a very, very soft wood. You try to chisel it, even with a sharp chisel, these fibers have a tendency to just, see that? They won't even support themselves. Look at the mess it makes. The wood is just so weak. You cut that with a thin saw, a pull saw, and there's not a problem. With a piece of Western hardwood, if I had a piece of, here's a piece of 1-inch hard maple. If I used a Western, I'm not going to cut into that because it's too expensive, but if I used a pull saw, which is a very thin blade, oftentimes down to 12/1000ths of an inch in thickness, so take 3 sheets of writing paper, and there's the thickness of your blade. That's pretty thin. You mark out your lines. You've got line marked across the end. You've got one down the face, and you start cutting. And people love them because the pull action is easier to start. You get a nice straight line across the front and down the face. But then when you look over on the backside, that little thin blade has wandered and followed the path of least resistance. Now you cut the section out, and that surface left is not flat. Well, if it's not flat, you can't get a good joint, because a good joint is when two flat surfaces come together. The flatter they are and the smoother they are, the better will be the glue joint. That's why Western hardwoods are attacked or cut with Western style saws, which is typically, whether you're looking at my example or an old one like this, you've got a heavy brass back supporting a relatively thin blade, and that thin blade is held firm by that brass back. Now, people often worry about the thickness of the blade. The blade creates the kerf. The kerf is in the waist, so what does it matter? I would say that the reason why you want a thin blade is it's a smaller amount of wood to be removed, easier to cut. Not much sense having an 1/8 inch thick blade on a dovetail saw. You don't need to cut that much stock. But Western style saws for Western hardwoods, Japanese style saws for Japanese woods, which tend to be a lot lighter than our heavy, hard, dense Western hardwoods. That's the reason. Now I just had, where did I do with my, I mixed them up. How's Joe?
We can bring him on whenever.
You want to get him now?
May as well.
Tell me when he's ready, and I'll do another one. Ronald Orbison. That might have been Roy. Kingman, Arizona. Rob, I'm older and wear glasses. Welcome to the club. I'd like to know where you got the headband magnifiers that you wear sometimes. These are Lifesavers. And the brand is Optivisor. It's made in the US. I buy mine from Woodcraft. And they're not very expensive. They've got an adjustable headband. I'm not thrilled with the way they hold the magnifiers in, but it stays. Although if you rough handle it all, they'll fall out. And you can buy these different numbers, which is, I think, the focal point. So the number 3 are the ones that I use the most. They're inexpensive enough that I actually have 2 pair. I've got a 3 in one and a 5 in the other. But Optivisor is the brand. And yeah, if you got old eyes, they're critical. Okay, Bill Larson from Augusta, Kansas. Why can't I buy hand planes from you? So back in 2000, from 2000 to 2008, I represented Lee Nielsen in Canada. And in early 2008, Lee Nielsen changed the way they did business, and they started going direct to the consumer, which means they didn't need me anymore. And Woodcraft saw the writing on the wall. Woodcraft carried Lee Nielsen planes and were probably their biggest distributor. And Lee Nielsen pulled out of all the Woodcraft stores, almost all of them. As a result, Woodcraft was going to be left without a hand plane line. So they contacted me and asked me if I would work as a consultant to them to help them develop the hand planes. At first, they were going to try to build a US-made plane. Terrible time trying to find anybody that would even get back to them with a quote. The foundry work and the manufacturing capacity had been shipped overseas, so there wasn't a lot of it going on. As a result, it wasn't going well. But they had this Wood River in-house brand, and they said to me, "Can you fix this?" And they sent me one, and I wrote them back, long report, and said it's a piece of junk. Here's why. They said, "Well, can we do something with it?" And I simply said, "Well, if you're willing to go the whole 9 yards, I'll help you." So they said, "Yes, we will." And they did it. And over the period of the next 9 months, they made some substantial changes to where I felt like that plane represents the best value in planes. Now, I have both Lee Nielsen and Wood River. Here's the Lee Nielsen. It's the number 8. It costs $500. Here's the number 7. That's $300 and something. Considerably less money. And with the exception of the fact that it's not quite as pretty, and some people might even argue that point, but it works extremely well. This is my 5.5. If I thought my Lee Nielsen 5.5 was better, I'd have kept it. I'm thrilled with this. I think this is a great plane. After we were done and got these things up and running, Woodcraft came to me and said, "Rob, would you like to sell these in Canada?" I said, "Yes, I would." And they said, "Okay, the one thing we ask is that you not compete with the franchisees by selling them back into the U.S." And that was just a request. I've honored it, and I continue to honor it. We'll ship them anywhere but into the U.S. So I'm sorry I can't send planes to you, but we can send anything else. And the one way that we kind of make up is we will send you a prepared blade and chip breaker set for any of those planes, so that if you're new to this and you don't have a working example of what is sharp, this way you can, and it will become your benchmark. Get it from us, pop it into your plane, and go to work and experience what a really sharp blade is like. For people who are trying to do this on their own, learning on their own, and nobody's there to show you, and you don't have a reference, how do you know when you get it right? So thanks for asking, so I could clarify that. Pardon, Joe's here? All right, so Joe I was teaching in Niagara Falls. Joe sat immediately to my left. He was from southeastern U.S., had quite an accent, a little bit of a hillbilly. And I really didn't expect much from him in terms of skill. Well, don't ever judge a book by its cover. Joe, with his goatee and his twang, produced one of the best dovetails I've ever seen. It was incredible. I was gobsmacked, to use an English term. And Joe and I have stayed in touch all this time. Joe's helped me tremendously when Jesse was going through some tough times. If you don't know who Jesse is, the whole Purple Heart project grew from my meeting in association with Jesse Bradas. And I put he and Joe together one time when we were visiting Southern California. I was teaching down there at the Ventura store. And Joe has kept tabs on him and helped out. And Jesse's in a good place. And a large part of that is because of his association and being watched over by Joe. So I tip my hat to Joe. So I asked Joe this week if he would be the guy that comes on and tells you being the supportive public, and also the combat wounded vets who are sitting there thinking about the program. That's quite the beard, Joe.
Thank you.
Grown a little since I've seen you.
Just a little. Got it tamed, though.
So I'm going to let Joe tell you his experience with the Purple Heart, his experience with hand tool woodworking, and I'm going to ask him specifically to address other combat wounded vets who are thinking about this and maybe think they don't deserve it, or some other crazy thoughts they might have. And also he can say thank you for the support that enabled him to come to the Purple Heart. Take it away, Joe.
Well, my name's Joe, like Rob said. I did a little over 10 years in the Marine Corps, got hurt pretty bad on my last tour in Iraq, and was medically retired because of the injuries. I found Rob online, and I kind of started liking the hand tool prospect, but didn't have a way to do it. And I found that what little I did have, it helped a ton with being able to calm down and get my mind off things. So I decided, after pressure from my wife, ironically, to go ahead and apply for the program. I was picked the first time I applied. This was 2017, I believe. And that 5 days, I've never had a time more peaceful than that 5 days. Even though I was exhausted, I was completely and utterly happy. When I came home with the tools, I continued as much as I could, and anytime I felt overrun or, my stress was building up, I went outside, and even if it was just take a piece of 2x4 and plane it away to nothingness and shavings, I felt a million times better afterwards. And I have continued to this day, as often as I can, I try and get out and do something. To those vets that think you don't deserve it, or you're not qualified, believe me, if you hurt in some way, either physically or mentally, this will help. I didn't think I qualified. I really didn't. If you apply, you are picked and you go through this program, the benefits are unreal. I mean, just the state of mind, let alone a little bit of physical workout, because some of us, we don't exactly like the gym. It's too crowded, or we don't want to go out and mess around in public because it's too crowded. Doing this at home is the same thing. And even if you can't do it, a lot of physical work, like myself, it's a great, quick workout, doesn't exhaust you, but the benefits are enormous. And, Rob and his whole crew and Colonel Luther, they were wonderful. I met Jake face-to-face, met Rob and Colonel face-to-face, and they help you no matter what. Even now that I've been home and haven't been back to that program or up there to see them, I still get contacted all the time, see how I'm hanging out, see how things are going. The benefits just far outweigh anything you can dream of. Medicine doesn't equal this, It's completely unreal. And the help from the bench brigade with Mr. Lane down there in Texas. You know, that makes, I know, my heart swell with pride, knowing that people are out there and wanting to help us, even if it's, you know, out of their own pocket like that, trying to help build a bench and deliver it. That makes people feel better quickly. It restores our faith in things and brings a smile to our face that's kind of hard to find sometimes.
Who's building your bench?
Mike McIntyre down in Arizona, actually.
Got a delivery date?
Not yet. He said he's still waiting on some things, so. But we've been talking, we've been emailing back and forth, and we're going to have a good video for you, and some pictures and everything else for you.
That's good. Now, we've been down there. I've seen you a couple times since, right?
Yes, I've helped you every time you come out to the Ventura Woodcraft. I've driven up there to help you out and just kind of help teach the course. Or
did you meet Ahmed? Were you with us?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Yourself, Ahmed, Jesse, and I went to dinner, I believe, the last time you came out there.
Yeah, the fish and chips place down in the water.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was delicious. Making me hungry. Well, thank you, Joe. I appreciate you always being there. You were, I wasn't kidding when I said you were a big reason why Jesse is in a better place, and having you there watching out for him. I'd get a call from you or a text and said, I think you need to give Jesse a call, and it was always timely. So, true to what you guys do, you're always watching out for each other.
Oh yeah, hands down.
The rest of us could learn a lot from that. All right, any closing comments?
I mean, any help anyone can give to Rob, please do. You know, it's a wonderful cause. It's helping so many people in these past several years he's done it. Please feel free to help. Any way possible, anything helps.
Your dovetails?
And thank you to those that do.
Your dovetails getting any better?
Oh yeah. I'm actually working on a few little interesting things here. I'll send you some pictures down the road.
Any drums lately?
I have one that's in the process, but my pup had surgery to have his eye removed, so I'm kind of on hold for a little while till he heals up.
All right.
But, yeah, I got drums in the works. I got table in the works. A few other little small projects here and there.
Well, thank you, Joe. Appreciate you doing this.
Never a problem, and thank you, gentlemen. All to the Rob crew and everybody else.
Take care.
Yep, y'all take care.
We got Manoli here. So he's going to come in about 10 minutes. Any questions come in, Frick, or shall I continue on here?
I was focusing on this story.
All right. So Nils Volgaret from Belgium says, what is the best way to reset your saw after sharpening? Well, if you're talking about a dovetail saw, you could probably sharpen it 2 or 3 times before you need to reset. So, in case you don't understand, the way a saw works, there are teeth cut into this plate or this blade, and those teeth are bent. So if the first tooth is bent to that side, the next tooth is bent to this side. And you go right on down the line, and it looks like this. And you have to have that bend. If you didn't, and the teeth were simply the same, or the blade was the same width at the teeth as it is here, you wouldn't get into the wood more than 1/16 of an inch, and it would bind. So the set produces what we call a kerf. Kerf has got to be wider than the blade, but not too wide. Ideally, you want that kerf to be just wide enough that it'll allow the blade to get down into the wood without binding. So when you make your cut, if the set is perfect, the blade actually touches on the sides of the kerf. And what that does is it prevents the blade from wandering to the left or wandering to the right. and it forces it to cut straight. When I made my saw, I designed it with 2/1000 of an inch set per side. So this kerf is, I should be able to take a piece of paper and just slide it. I don't even know, I think this stuff's a little bit thicker than 4/1000. But there should only be the thickness of one piece of paper extra in width next to the blade itself. So you don't want too much set. You get too much set and it wobbles all over, and you literally have to steer it instead of just pushing and pulling. If you can imagine, if that tooth is bent like this, as you file it, when you sharpen and you shorten that tooth, or you move that tooth farther down the blade, you're going to have more set out here with a brand new tooth than you are when you've gone down into here. You're going to have half the set and eventually have no set. So about every third sharpening, you may have to readjust the set. And there are lots of different saw sets. I don't know of any brand that's new that I would recommend. I always buy mine at flea markets and old tool stores. So there's an anvil, that's what that thing is called. And if you could see, there's a bevel on that anvil that starts with very little, and as it goes around, it gets more and more. So when this plunger right here, so you would put that down inside your blade like that, on your blade, and you would line up that plunger with the tooth. And when I squeeze it hard enough, that little plunger will push the tooth over against the anvil. And depending on how much slope there is on the anvil, that will determine how far out that tooth gets bent. Now, the problem that you're going to encounter is that most saw sets don't allow for that fine of a set. And the other problem is that the anvil is too wide. They're used to doing a much bigger tooth. So you actually may have to go in and file down that, take it apart and file down that anvil so that you're only touching one tooth. Hope this is all being understood. And I've noticed sometimes I've got to go in and I've got to stone the side after I've set it because the anvil wouldn't allow for a fine enough set. It bends it over too far. And then you got to go in, take I use a diamond stone because it wears better. Lay your blade down like that. With your thumb, secure your stone. With your thumb putting pressure, pull the blade. See if we can get this to stay put. Your thumb putting pressure right there. Pull your blade like that. You're stoning off some of that set. And I would count. I would do one on one side and go in and do one on the other side. And then I would come in and I would make a cut and I would check it. Now I'm looking for two things. I'm looking for excess slop and I'm looking to see if the blade wanders to the left or to the right. If you apply your set and you get it so that it's heavier on one side than the other, the saw is going to want to go to the side that has the most set. So if I started cutting and the blade was veering off to the left, then I know this side has too much set. And I would come in and I would take another pass like that on the diamond stone, one pass at a time, come over and check. And I would keep doing that until I finally get a nice straight meaning shortest distance between 2 points, no curves. And I need to have it clear. Now it's probably best to do it in a piece of hardwood. You want enough set that you can get through the wood, but not too much. So, and actually I'll say a couple more things about this. It's very hard to see, especially when you're doing a 15 TPI saw. That stands for teeth per inch. So what I do is I put my headgear on and I'll take my Sharpie and I'll try to figure out, it's not easy, I'll try to figure out which tooth is bent this way and I'll put a little dot on it. So there's going to be a little black dot on every other tooth so that when I come in here to do the setting, I can line that up with the tooth that needs to be bent, and then I'll get it right. And you just work your way all the way down, then you got to turn around and do the other side, and it's a tedious job that I do not thoroughly enjoy. So learn to do it yourself. And by the way, I paid $10 for that at the flea market. So these are not expensive items. I'll see if I can find it. I've got one that I use more than those two. I hardly ever use. I've got one that is a little better in terms of the fact that it's the anvil, the part that pushes against the tooth. Here it is here. Oh, I got tons of them. So here's an old Stanley, but you see how wide that anvil is? You couldn't use that on a 15 TPI. You'd be touching 3 teeth. That one's a little bit smaller. This is the one that I typically use. So you see how small that anvil is? I'm not anvil, pardon me. The anvil's over here on this side. I'm the pin that pushes against the tooth. So you loosen this, and then you can rotate the anvil. I don't know if you can see or not, but the slope on the anvil increases as you go around, and then you lock it where you want it. So I've got it set on the finest, and then this plunger, this large plunger will first go in there, and it'll hold the blade tight to the anvil, and then as you continue to squeeze, that little plunger will come out and push that tooth over. So this is actually my favorite one, and I'm trying to look to see if I can find a brand name on it. Can you hone in on that and see what it says? Can you read it?
Looks like Somax.
Can you read anything on there? I can't even tell whether it's upside down.
No.
Yeah. Let me see. I'll put this on and see if I can give you some more information. Yeah, the brand is SOMAX, Somax. And the model number is 250. Somax, SOMAX, model number 250. And I can't imagine it being terribly expensive. We'll actually see if we can't source that. We'll provide it. All right, back to my questions.
I got a couple.
Do you?
Yeah.
Fire away.
All right. First one comes from Justin Bernhoft. And he says, why is it that back in the day, premium saws had folded brass backs, and today there is only one company doing it? Was it just a selling gimmick, or did you consider doing folded brass backs?
That's a good question, and I can only give you my guess. I've had people tell me that no, it has to be a folded brass back, holds the blade in tension, allows you to straighten the blade. But you know what? We've been making these for 12 years. I can't tell you how many thousands. I make every one of them, so I know. I can't tell you how many thousands we've made. I've never had anybody have a complaint. If the blade isn't perfectly straight, it's just a matter of bending the brass back a little bit to pull it into being straight. Works like a charm. And if you can produce dovetails like that with the saw, then why do you go any farther? So I think the folded brass back, my guess was, at the time, it seemed to be the easiest way to do it. Maybe they didn't have the capacity or the capability of milling the solid brass stock. I don't know. I can't tell you. But that's my guess. All right. Now, we're going to bring Manoli on.
Can we do one more quick question?
Sorry.
He
Yep,
probably
go ahead.
has to tune it up a little bit. But Jim Farrell wants to know, Robin, looking at some of your old projects on the website, I see that you have used story sticks. Do you have any information or instructions on preparing or using them?
Story sticks are far more common in cabinet making. So if you were building a kitchen cabinets for somebody in a reno or new construction, and the building is there, and you're building them at your shop, and you're going to move them in, and there's a light switch there, and there's a plug there, and there's something else you have to work around there. It's one thing to have it drawn all out on a piece of paper. It's another thing to actually have a stick of wood, or called a story pole, that you would put in place, and you would go along, and you would, on that stick, you would have it referenced. You would mark where everything is over the entire length. You can lay the whole thing out on there, and it was a very accurate way of building, so that when you moved it in, I mean, if your story pole matches the wall where this cabinet's going to go, and you take it to your shop and you build it according to that story pole, and now that story pole matches the cabinet that you have in your shop, when you take it to the job site, it should fit. And you would do them vertically and you would do them horizontally. And I don't know enough about it to come off with any kind of expertise. I've used it sometimes in building a piece of furniture. I know when we did it, those ones we did. But really, that's a question for a cabinet maker. And I don't build cabinets if I can avoid it. Ask my wife. I much prefer to build furniture. Okay.
Luther wanted me to say that the Somax 250 saw set is Japanese made and it's $25 online.
All right. Thanks, Luther. We'll see if we can't get them. So I've known Manoli since he was born. He and my brother, my youngest brother Randy, grew up together. And Manoli has been one of these people who learns music by ear, just picks it up. Amazes me. I could build the guitar, but couldn't play it to save my life. Paul Rigney, who is a luthier and a World War II, sorry, Paul, Vietnam vet down in the Knoxville, Tennessee area. Paul approached me one time when I was down there teaching, and he said, Rob, he gave me a t-shirt. He said, if you wear this t-shirt, which advertises his guitar building, the next time you do a YouTube, the next guitar we build, I'll donate it to you to sell to raise money for the Purple Heart Project. And I thought, well, gee, that's great, Paul. Well, he and the East Tennessee Luthiers Guild built that guitar, sent it to us, and we have it up for auction. And all of the proceeds will go to supporting somebody, one of the vets in our Purple Heart Project. So Manoli has just recorded some new music. He's going to play some original work. We're going to give him play one now and one at the end of tonight. So he'll tell you a little bit about the guitar, and then I'm just going to sit here and enjoy it with you. Take it away.
Oh, thanks a lot, Rob. I appreciate that. I just was in the studio with a fella named Paul Milner. He's worked with people like Keith Richards and Eddie Grant, and I did a couple songs in there that will be released within the next 3 weeks. Rob had asked me to come in to try this guitar out, and I've tried it a few times, and it's wonderful. It's like a Martin D27, I believe, and correct me, Paul, if I'm wrong. And it's getting better every time I come here. It's amongst wood, and the wood is aging, and it sounds fantastic. So here's a song called Evangelina, and we'll add the link later. So, thanks.
Listen to what I have to say. The concrete's at your back door, and you got nowhere to pray. So lay down here beside me, tell me that you care. Comfort me in sorrow and your long red hair. Rock me in your arms, Evangelina. I'm a fool to your charms, Evangelina. If I say goodbye, Evangelina.
Oh, thank you very much. That guitar sounds better every time I come in.
Yeah, I can sit here and listen to that all night.
So it's great. I brought a Gibson J45, and that's my main guitar over there. And they're not a cheap guitar. And I would say this one, I think this one may age a little better than that. In the wood they chose with the top. So privileged to play it. Thanks very much.
Great. I'm going to get you to come back just at the close and give you another one. Do another one for us. Thanks, Manoli.
Yeah, thank you very much.
If you're interested in bidding on that, just leave a note in the comment section. I think we're sitting right now at 2,100. I think Santa Claus has got a bid in on it. All right, back to the questions. If you got anything, Frick, or I'll go back to some that come in.
Nope.
Okay.
Read one from the...
All right, Ronald, Bill, we did that one. Michael Murphy says, from Washington State, what is the most annoying repeated question you get? Well, it's, what is the most annoying repeated question you get? All questions are good. I just ignore the one. I don't bother with the ones that annoy me. Thanks for asking. Stephen Wilson from Shropshire, England. Rob has removed all the protective pads from his Bessie F-clamps. Bessie obviously thinks they're necessary, but Rob doesn't. Please explain why. Well, here's why. Now, I leave them on a few, but any of my heavy-duty clamps, which would be the Tradesman F-clamps, that's what this is, and I've got several sizes of them, they usually have a little plastic cap that goes on here, and they've got a piece that fits over here. And what I find is if you get into anything other than two perfectly parallel surfaces, they'll slide. So if you've got a little bit of a slope, they'll bite. Without having the pad on, it'll hold its position. So I've taken them off for that reason. Now I do leave them on the lighter duty clamps. So this one, which is made by Quick Clamp.
It's made by Bessie.
Oh, it's made by Bessie, but the brand is Click Clamp. It's a lighter duty, and I do leave the pad on there because I often have to use that on a finished surface. And it's sometimes awkward to have to go in and try to put a block on there, especially because I can often use this one-handed. So I leave them on, I leave the pads on that one. And anything else that you see that I leave it on, it's usually because it's a light-duty clamp. But any of the heavy-duty stuff that I'm really torquing, I take those pads off. And I should have saved them, but I didn't. So now I always have to make sure I have some kind of a protective pad before I put a lot of pressure on something.
I have a question from our very own Jack Lane on the subject of clamps.
Jack Lane?
He says, you have thousands of dollars in clamps, and why no parallel clamps?
Don't like them, Jack. So they're fairly new, which simply means that I didn't grow up with them. The parallel clamps, other than saying the term parallel clamp, I can't describe it any more than that. They're big, they're really expensive. I find them a little bit awkward and clumsy, but maybe it's just because I don't use them very much. I've only used them a few times. My staple has always been pipe clamps, and I have hundreds of them, and I don't think that's an exaggeration. Hardly ever use them anymore because a lot of the furniture we're building now is smaller. But if I do, they're all stored out back. They're on a 3/4 inch pipe, 3/4 inch pipe, and you can get a ton of torque on them. But you had to be careful because they have a tendency as you tighten for them to pull in like this. So you always had to do something so that the force is being sent down right through the middle. The pad would have a tendency to pull back like that. So if you clamped a series of boards, you'd always have to have one clamp on the bottom, then one on the top, bottom, top to counteract that. And the square clamps, or the parallel clamps he's talking about, supposedly deal with that. I really like these. By the way, here's something else too. The better you get in woodworking, the less clamping pressure you'll need. You'll come to find that out. I see some people just torque that thing down and it leaves the wood screaming for mercy. So this is a relatively light F-clamp, and I use it a lot. It doesn't require, if you're having to apply that much clamping pressure, then you probably have an issue with your joint that needs to be addressed instead of more clamping pressure. So, can't really fault those clamps other than that I didn't grow up using them, so never took to them. Okay, Jason in Belgium. How do you cut a groove for a bottom in a through dovetail box? Well, good question. First thing I do is I will plan so that the groove ends up being somewhere between the two pins. So, for instance, on this one, I would have planned it so that the groove would have been right here. Okay? If it came all the way through. That means when I'm planing the groove or cutting the groove on the walnut piece, it would be between the two pins and you wouldn't see it. So how do you address it when you're cutting it on the tailboard is what he's referring to. The easiest way is to do a step dovetail. That means that this tail would be cut right here. So the walnut on this one tail would come, the pin would be cut down to here, over and up. The rest of them would be full depth. When I cut this piece, I would end up cutting off this piece of the dovetail so that the groove that you see would now disappear because the walnut would go right up to there. Yet you would have been able to cut that groove with the same plane. So if I'm using a drawer bottom plane, which I frequently do, you can't stop part way. You've got to be able to go all the way through. That nose piece has to have clearance. So the easiest way to do it is to use have a dovetail cut short like that. So if I'm hoping you're able to understand this. So what you would see when this is all done is that this would all be walnut. And that's not bad. So you get a full-size tail here, full-size tail here, and then half a tail there. If you don't do it that way, then you've got to go in. I've done it before. I go in with a marking gauge and establish the two outside edges of the groove, and then you've got to remove the material between with the most effective tool, and even that is difficult, would be a small router plane with a tiny cutter. And you would go in and remove that material, but you're having to make multiple passes, so you're beating up the inside edge of the board, and it's not very fun. Ultimately, you may end up finishing it with a small, narrow chisel right at the end. So the best way is to do that with your dovetail. There's how it would look when you're done. And that is the quickest and the cleanest way to do it. Speak up, Frick, if you have one. Let's take this one from Steve Rowe in Arkansas. Do you have any tips, suggestions for clamping thin pieces for hand planing? Even light clamping pressure creates a bow, and the gap in my tail vise for short pieces doesn't provide enough work support. So when I'm planing something really thin, oh, look at that. I've got a piece right here. Watch this. So we need to plane that.
Well, there's two options.
All right.
That's very thin, but you can also use your planing board.
Yes. Well, let's address this one first. So the easiest way to do it is to take a piece of masking tape, put that piece of masking tape on the back side.
Megan wanted us to know that we have reached our first
1,000
in donations.
Thank you.
So we'll be giving away a gift card later.
I forgot to even talk about that. Now what I'm going to do is just go in there and squeeze that. And now I can take my plane. Now if I was worried about those bench dog holes, which I would be if I was actually doing this for a specific purpose, other than a quick demonstration, I would probably put a piece of MDF on there so that the board was fully supported. But now you can go in and you can plane. And if you look real close, you can actually see where the dog holes. Can you see that? You can see where the dog holes are.
You also wouldn't do that little amount of tape.
You mean I would go the full length? Yeah, because that'll actually create a little bit of a bump. But that'll allow you to go in and do what you need to do. So, just to be clear, so I didn't have those shadows of those where the board was being planed over an opening. I would have gone in there and put a piece of MDF on there like that, and then go ahead and plane so it's well supported underneath. That's the easiest way. You could also figure out a way to use that masking tape trick with the super glue. The only problem is you got to be careful peeling it off, especially if it's really thin stock. But you can go in and plane little wee thin stuff like that. And what Jake was referring to is I have a planing board, which is just a piece of MDF with a thin cleat on here. But anytime you're planing thin stock, if your support is up here, that thing's going to want to bubble, jump up ahead of you. So you always have to be planing in tension, not in compression, meaning you got to be supporting it back here and then planing in that direction, as opposed to having something up here. Good question.
I got one.
Hope you like the answer. Yep.
This one comes from Rockstar79.
Is that a drink?
Rockstar is a drink, yes. I'm not sure if that's why or what he's named after. But anyway, it says, does Rob have a material he recommends for making reusable templates?
Reusable templates? Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay. So something that you can use multiple times. Probably my favorite choice for making templates is MDF. So the advantage is, of course, stability. The problem with reusable is that if you're running along the edge, especially if you're running if you're using a flush trim and you're using the bearing on the bottom of a router, it'll sink into that soft core, that soft underbelly of the MDF. So what I do then is I come in with my cyanacrylate, that being super glue, and if you get the thin stuff, you can come in and it's this stuff is extremely absorbent, so it's going to use a lot. But if you just go in and saturate the edge, I do the whole thing, that'll stiffen that up and it'll last a lot longer than if you were just running on that soft MDF core. I don't like making them out of plywood because plywood doesn't lay flat, and I don't like making them out of solid wood because it moves, so MDF is the best. Now, I have some that we use when we make our handles that we use thousands, literally thousands of times, and I make those out of 1/2-inch aluminum. Nice thing about aluminum is you can cut it on the bandsaw, you can sand it, although you got to be careful because it's really sticky. You can shape it with the router. It's pretty easy material to work, but it stands up a whole lot better. I'm watching the time. We're going to get Manoli back in here shortly. See if we can get a few more questions in. North Vancouver, here's a Canadian one. Why do you not put self-edging on your $100 workbench to protect the edges and dress it up? I think what he means is, why do we not go in and put hardwood all the way around the edge? Well, the whole idea behind that bench was to get it done in a weekend, so Friday you start it, Monday you're working on it. And we're trying to keep it down to an absolute minimum. How can I build this bench with minimal skill, minimal tools at a minimal cost? And that's the reason. If you want to go in and dress it up, well, more power to you. Typically, that's going to end up, if you're continuing this craft, that's probably going to end up being your assembly bench, and you're going to end up building a fancier bench at some point. So goes the story. So, but no, you can do whatever you want. Somebody else asked me, I don't remember where it is, about putting a what do we call this? A tool tray. And yes, we do that. We make the tool tray. We do it in our class. We make the tool tray. In fact, I haven't got one close at hand to show you. There's some way up there in the top, but it's typically a backboard. We dovetail in a short piece here and a short piece there. We cut a groove on the 3 pieces and we slide a piece of 1/2-inch plywood into the bottom. Leave that plywood at least an extra 4 inches wide this way, so that when you pull this in tight, you just screw up through the plywood into the bottom side of the bench, and it holds it nice and tight and supports it well. That's why we use 1/2 inch on the bottom. Okay. See if we can get another one in. You got one?
Yeah, I'll do a quick one from, this comes from Ben Adams. He says, hey Rob, when selecting wood for a project, how much attention do you pay for how the wood is sawn, quarter sawn, etc.?
Well, if I'm looking for drawer side material and I can find quarter sawn, that's your best bet for stability. If I'm looking for bird's eye maple, if it's quarter sawn, you're just, instead of seeing bird's eyes, you're just going to see vertical lines. So you want it flat sawn so you see the bird's eye better. So those are 2 quick examples. I'm always looking for stability, because anytime you're building anything, you don't want wood that's going to be moving wildly. And so what I'll do is, for drawer fronts, find if the drawer front's going to be made out of walnut, I will build the drawer out of the most stable material I can find, but then I'll find a piece of really pretty wood and I'll slice off 1/8-inch slices, and I'll glue that pretty figured walnut onto that nice plain stable walnut, so that you have the continuity of walnut all the way through, but you've got the stability on the inside, you've got the figure on the outside. Here's a question I want to read. This is from Rich Massili, who's in Agawam, Massachusetts, at Nome. He said, I received my RobCosman dovetail saw, thank you, with the large handle, and I want to let you know that this is the first time in 40 years of woodworking that either a hand plane or saw actually fit my hand. It is a thing of beauty, and it has motivated me to bring my work to the next level. Way to go, Rich. For those of you who are curious, I just made 4 of them today. We make a handle. If your hand measures, it's a good time to say it. If your hand across the palm, at the base of the index finger and the pinky, if it measures more than 4 inches, you need our large handle. Anything up to 4 inches, you're fine with the regular. Mine measures 3.5, if you hold it right there and look. Thanks for bringing that up, Rich. I always call anybody that orders that large handle just to make sure that they haven't made a mistake. One last question, then we'll bring Manoli in. If you haven't donated and you want to, we're always accepting donations for our Purple Heart. Don't forget T-shirts. Don't forget our draw. We'll draw for a $100 gift certificate for every 1,000 increment we have in donations tonight. What do you got on here? I picked out some. Okay, here's one. This is from Steve Hodges in Illinois. I'm just getting started with hand tools. Can you talk about replacing versus refurbishing blades for vintage planes? If replacing, what is the best source to finding the correct blade? Well, the problem with the traditional planes, now this is a little number 1, so it's not a very good example, but you can still see. The problem with the original blades is that they're very thin. They typically measure 75 to 80 thousandths of an inch in thickness. Now, replacement blades, by everybody else, were could only go up to 90 thou. If they went beyond 90 thou, what happened was the yoke, that's the little part attached to the adjuster knob that goes through the blade into the slot in the chip breaker. That's how you get your advance and retract mechanism. If your blade went beyond 90 thou, the yoke was too short, wouldn't make it to the hole, and you wouldn't get your full range of motion. So I went to work with IBC 12 years ago and put to work an idea that I'd had. And that is I wanted to put a really thick blade, which essentially solves 90% of the problems with the old planes. That big thick blade answers the stability issue. But because it's so thick, the yoke doesn't make it all the way through. So we added these two little tabs of metal attached to the chip breaker on the underside. So that now, instead of the chip breaker or the yoke having to come to the chip breaker goes to the yoke. Allows you to put that massively, look how thick that is. 125 thou over here, 140 thou here. More metal in there than there is in most cars. And that thing, the only time it vibrates is in 0.8 on the Richter scale in an earthquake. So if you insist on rehabbing an old plane and you want to get maximum performance out of it, then you need to get a better blade. I would suggest you buy, my recommendation is going to be what we sell, because why would I recommend anything else? If I thought the other stuff out there worked better, I wouldn't have done this. So you want the IBC replacement blade. You can get it in 4 sizes: 1 3/4 for Stanley's number 3 and number 5 1/4, 2 inch for Stanley number 4 and number 5, 2 3/8 inch for Stanley number 4 1/2, 5 1/2, 6, 7, and a 2 5/8 for Stanley number 8. And they're all available on our site. Woodcraft carries them as well. All right, so just before we do our final wrap-up, we're going to have Manoli play us another original tune.
Why don't we?
What?
Why don't we do the draw and then Manoli can play us out? I think that'd be a good way to finish.
You mean instead of giving people that last chance to donate?
Oh, okay, never mind.
As their hearts get softened by
really quickly
being serenaded by Manoli?
We had some really quick questions from our Super Dave Benson.
Super Dave.
Number 1, he wants to know if Rob ever gets jealous of his dovetail skills. Or
every night.
Is Rob just stuck with Jake, or is there another reason he's stuck with such a subpar cameraman? Does Frick not have anything better to do with his Saturday nights?
No.
Not anymore, since I'm not DJing weddings. I guess I'm stuck here. Did you guys invent COVID so the borders would close because you're so intimidated by my woodworking skills? Invent COVID.
Yeah, yes and no to all the above. All right, Manoli, take it away.
Here's another original song. I remember when you left me torn, when I died in your life, you laughed with bitter scorn. You kept me a prisoner with pleasure and fear. We both can do better. Maybe that's why I'm here. I swallow my pride to hide my pain. Sometimes I prefer to drink alone, get my head all torn till I'm gone. Things have changed, yeah, they have changed, like the wind and rain that make us strong. I'm no fun then, why'd you call me? You said I never have money, and honey, we always fight. I bit my tongue and said I'm sorry. You think we could talk it over here tonight? I swallow my pride to hide my pain. Sometimes I prefer to drink alone, get my head off on till I'm gone. Things have changed now, they have changed, like the wind and rain that make us strong. Why should we stay the same? Just go on. Look around home. Such a beautiful flower. Can't find a thorn. When I look in your eyes, I'm all torn. Thank you. Great guitar, Paul.
Thank you, Manoli.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful entertainment. All right, let's wrap this up. How many? I forgot Megan's on. Megan's visiting her family back in Utah, so she was out of sight, but she's not out of mind. She's working on the other end, and Ken's probably on there tonight as well. Super Dave, we didn't forget him because he had lots of questions. So how many are we giving away?
Just one.
One? You want to do the
just
draw?
one. Let's do it. And the winner of tonight's $100 is Robert Caudill.
Oh, I know Robert. Congratulations, Robert. All right. Don't forget your maple syrup. I forgot to mention that. Got to keep things sweet. Remember, wood is good. 3 t-shirts. Wood for good. Wood doing good. Wood is good. Angie is probably on tonight. Angie and Lynn.
I didn't see them. I'm not really monitoring
Well,
the chat.
Angie does all of our packaging of our t-shirts. You'll see her little symbol. Angie's Ken's cousin. That's her. She's part of our team as well. We'll be back in 2 weeks. We're going to bring you another special guest. Stay tuned. Make sure you're on our newsletter so that you'll find out who that's going to be. And that's how we'll keep in touch with one another. Hope you have a lovely weekend. Stay safe. See you soon. Thanks for joining us.